It is an exciting decade for Montreal. Many transit projects are being planned and built around the city and the metropolitan area. The main one, the Tram, a 67-kilometer automated metro network, is almost 100% operational. The last two phases of the Tram are expected to open in the next 2 years if all goes well. But today we are talking about a different project, the Projet Structurant de l'Est. And unfortunately, I think this project is not as good as it should be. And we'll talk about why is this in this video. As the name suggests, it's a project aiming to build a new transit network in the eastern part of Montreal's island. That's one of the regions of the city that desperately needs more rapid transit. There has been 3 projects proposed in 5 years, so let's go back in time a little bit. In 2020, the first proposed project was called the Tram de l'Est. It was named this way because it would be pretty similar to the original Tram, an automated metro with elevated tracks and stations with platform screen doors. It would have also been built by the same people as the original Tram, CDPQ Infra. The proposed network had a main line starting downtown Montreal with an underground station near Gare Centrale. Then it would come out with elevated tracks along Boulevard René Lévesque. A bit further, it would remain elevated along Notre-Dame Street, which is more of a stroad than a street, but anyway. And then the line would branch out. The first branch would connect further east to the Green Line at Honoré-Beaugrand and then continue along Sherbrooke Street all the way to Pointe-aux-Trembles, the final stop of the branch. The second branch would begin with elevated tracks on Boulevard de l'Assomption, with a station connecting to the existing Green Line metro station of the same name. After that, the tracks would go underground, with the last 8 stations of the branch built below ground. Along those 8 stations, the line would connect to a hospital, a cégep, which is basically a college, and in terms of transit, it had planned connections to the Green Line at 2 stations, but also the future Blue Line extension that's currently under construction, as well as a stop on line 15 of the commuter rail network. This project was great in many ways. It would have given a direct rapid transit connection to downtown for thousands of people living in that area. It also offered many strong connections to other rapid transit, and since it had 2 branches, it was also good for suburb to suburb travel, and not only suburb to downtown. That's very important, because too often in North America, rapid transit networks are only designed to bring people from the suburbs to downtown, instead of connecting neighborhoods and suburbs together without the need to go downtown first, and then needing to transfer to another line downtown to go back to the suburbs. This task of connecting suburbs together is usually given to overcrowded buses stuck in traffic, which is not great. Also, the project was not that expensive. An estimated 10 billion Canadian dollars for 32 kilometers of track and 23 stations, including 9 underground stations. Therefore, why was it abandoned in the first place? Well, to put it in one word, NIMBYs. The main criticism was the use of elevated tracks along most of the route, but especially the downtown stretch. People claim that it would make the neighborhoods uglier and split the neighborhoods in half, and that the noise of the trains would make people go crazy. So, together, let's look at the streets where the elevated tracks would have been built to see if those claims are justified. First, Boulevard René Lévesque downtown. It's already very ugly. It is 6 lanes wide, 8 lanes if you count the parking spots and the turning lanes, and it has horrendous traffic. And this is right in the middle of downtown, by the way. Meanwhile, here's what it would have looked like with the elevated Tram tracks. It is much more pleasant than a 6-lane stroad, and the Tram would carry far more people than those 6 car lanes ever could. So it makes sense to remove some car lanes to make space for the elevated tracks. And it's not for nothing, it's to give space for more efficient transportation. And the Tram would have removed many cars from the roads, since people living in eastern Montreal would now have a better alternative to go downtown rather than driving there. And since it's elevated, you can build nice things below and around it. Pedestrian spaces, separated bike lanes, trees, and more. Or also build shops below the rails, as they do in Japan, for example. Is that really uglier and less appealing than a 6-lane noisy stroad? Of course not. And the argument that it would split downtown in half or whatever, it's bullshit. Elevated tracks is like a bridge. It has pillars. It's not like a wall separating one side from the other. If anything, the current René Lévesque Boulevard is way worse in terms of splitting downtown in half, due to how unnecessarily wide it is. Some criticism also came from the people living in the most eastern part of the route, so maybe those streets are calmer and more beautiful, and putting elevated tracks there would be ugly. Well, no. Notre-Dame street has rails next to it, where noisy freight trains run. So the quiet modern REM trains next to the noisy freight trains would not be a problem. And further east, Sherbrooke Street is just another strode. So building elevated tracks there would not hurt at all the beauty of this street. Also, modern elevated infrastructure is not as invasive as people think. Some imagine the old elevated structures of the New York or Paris subway, those huge noisy metal infrastructure, but that's not what we are talking about. The REM uses sleek, narrow, modern, compact infrastructure. As for the noise, the REM de l'Est would have used modern, quiet trains such as those used on the original REM. These are not louder than trucks and cars and motorcycles that drive there. Here's what a train of the original REM sounds like next to a downtown street. It's not bad at all, right? And also that section was on a curve and trains make more noise on curves. And still it was not that bad. And that's coming from someone that lives in a very quiet suburban neighborhood. When you live in a city, you just get used to the noise. You won't even notice the train. A good example is that the people crying about the noise of the trains are people that live next to roads which make even more noise, but they just got used to that noise, and it will happen the same for the trains. If people are able to live under airplanes taking off every 3 minutes, I think people are able to survive to the noise of a train passing every 3 minutes too. In Vancouver, the SkyTrain uses similar infrastructure, which makes sense because the people that were gonna build the REM de l'Est, CDPQ Infra, actually were part of the development and operation of the Canada line of the SkyTrain. It has elevated tracks with elevated stations near downtown and further away. It's not disruptive to the neighborhood's beauty, definitely less disruptive than the stroads next to it. So would you really protest against such a useful project for your neighborhood just because you don't want your ugly 6-lane boulevard replaced by a modern system that could transport thousands of people a day and improve quality of life? It makes no sense, right? But still, people protested and the project was cancelled. I think one of the mistakes was announcing this project in 2020, which was before the original REM opened its first phase in 2023. It is harder for people to support something they have not seen in action, but also it could have been built if the government simply ignored the loud NIMBY minority. I believe the city of Montreal and the Quebec government could have pushed a bit more to get it done instead of just cancelling it due to a bit of opposition. So after the complaints, a second project was proposed, and that is where things start to get ridiculous. Since elevated tracks were the main criticism, the new idea was to make the entire line fully underground. The route was also changed a little bit. The downtown branch was completely removed, supposedly because it was too redundant with the green line of the metro, since it would have ran parallel to it. But this new project even proposed future expansions toward Laval and Repentigny. However, those would only come much later as planned expansions. Okay, there's many problems with that project. First, the cost, due to being fully underground. $36 billion. That is almost 4 times more than the original REM de l'Est project, for fewer stations and no downtown link. Second thing, the argument that the downtown line was useless due to the green line makes no sense. People coming from the far east would now need to transfer to the green line, making their trips longer and less convenient. And the planned REM downtown branch was not even on the same alignment as the green line. Yes, it ran parallel, but several blocks closer to the river, serving neighborhoods such as Hochelaga Maisonneuve and Viauville. While doing more research for this video, I found a proposed alternative route for the common branch of the REM de l'Est. The two branches in the east would pretty much be the same, except that the common downtown branch would not be along the Green Line and the Notre Dame Street anymore. The line would instead go through the Rosemont neighborhood as well as the Plateau, which are much more dense places, and they also lack rapid transit, since they're kind of between the blue, orange and green line of the metro. This idea actually looks a bit like the pink line of the metro, which was proposed a couple of years ago. I think this alternative route for the downtown branch is an amazing idea. The only downsides I can think of is the cost and the support for the project. Since this area is very residential, I think the NIMBYs will get very vocal, saying that the whole line should be underground, but as we saw earlier, this increases costs a lot. But I still think it's a pretty good idea. I might even dare to say that it's better than the original REM de l'Est project. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts about this. But anyway, let's get back to the me of the past talking about the underground REM de l'Est project. Some people actually preferred this underground idea, saying that outdoors trains don't run well in the cold, snowy Montreal weather, mentioning that the Montreal Metro is fully underground for a reason, and thus that the city cannot have rail transit outdoors. It is true that the original REM had some issues last winter, with service interruptions caused mainly by frozen rail switches. That was not great, I agree. But remember, it was the first project of the kind in Montreal, so of course some things would go wrong and some adjustments have to be made. That is a normal thing when you're doing something new. To compare, it's like when you start your first job. Yes, you may have the skills and the theory, but you still need time to adapt and to improve with experience. But actually, that's the exact reason why we have to build the REM de l'Est now. Since the original REM is a pretty recent project and it's still getting built today, it means that the expertise is here. We know how to build automated elevated metros, so we should build it before people start retiring, and thus we would lose that expertise to build such a project efficiently and with a low cost. We need to keep that momentum of building rapid transit in Montreal. The same goes for the metro after the Blue Line extension. Planners should already be thinking of the next expansion so that the engineers and the workers can reuse their hard-earned experience. But anyway, due to the crazy cost estimate, the underground REM project was obviously cancelled. After this, in 2025, so 5 years after the REM de l'Est project was proposed, a third project was proposed, this time a tram. The route is similar to the underground REM with a few differences. For instance, this version adds many stations along the Green Line. So what happened to the earlier argument that the REM de l'Est was too redundant with the Green Line? Anyway, but the biggest difference obviously is in the infrastructure. It's not a metro with elevated or underground dedicated tracks anymore. Okay, this is not good for many reasons. First, I think the tramway is simply not the good mode of transportation for this region. A tramway works best in dense areas, such as downtown Montreal or along busy commercial streets in the Plateau, for example, where buildings, shops, workplaces, and people are close together. But the eastern part of Montreal has a much lower density. That's why the planned stations are very far apart. 31 stations over 38 kilometers. That's about one station every 1.2 kilometers, which is way too much for a tram. A good tram should be a bit like an upgraded bus. The stops are close together, the trips are short, but the trams have a higher capacity and a better frequency, of course. For example, if you need to go to a shop 600 meters away and then go to another shop a few blocks further and then come back home, that's a perfect trip to be done with a tram. But if the stations are too far apart, you'll need to walk a lot to reach your destination. That's often what happens with subways. The stops are far apart and your destination is somewhere in between two stations. But that's okay, subways are still a good thing because they can take people between two places that are far apart because they're fast, they have dedicated right of way, and they have few stations to stop at. And you can feed the metro by bringing the people to the stations with buses. But the trams run at street level, so they're slower and are often affected by car traffic. So that's why trams should only be used in dense places for short trips. Meanwhile, this tram project connects many low-density neighborhoods and suburban cities together. And the worst of all, they plan to have a stretch of track along a highway median. A tram along a highway median that makes no sense. And it's another clear sign that the tram is not the good mode of transportation for that project. The problem is that the tram tries to do everything at once. It tries to link cities far away in the suburbs to Montreal, but at the same time it tries to bring more local service to some neighborhoods, so the suburban commuters will be mad because the trams are slow, and both commuters will still be mad that there is no direct rapid transit connection to downtown Montreal. Another downside for the tram is operational cost. The REM would have been automated, so no drivers needed. Trams in the other way cannot be automated, so they need drivers, which increases costs. And automation also means you can increase the frequency as you wish. You could run trains every 90 seconds with the push of a button if you want. With human drivers, that's not possible, unless you hire way more people. And also things can happen, such as the strike that happened in Montreal last November, where the metro drivers went on strike. That's a problem that you don't have with automated trains. The last downside with this project, but not the least, is the cost. Building a tramway should cost less money because the infrastructure is less complex. Trams run on street level, the trains are short. Stations are also not expensive to build since they're basically just platforms on street level. So I don't know how it's possible that this project was estimated at 18.6 billion Canadian dollars. That's almost 500 Canadian dollars per kilometer. To compare, in Paris, which is a very dense and expensive city, the many tramway lines cost about 50 million Canadian dollars per kilometer in average. Let's come back to the initial Rem de l'Est project. It was estimated at $10 billion, so almost half the price. Yes, it was planned to be a bit shorter than the tramway, 32 kilometers instead of 38 for the tramway, but it had more complex infrastructure, automated trains, dedicated tracks, many underground stations, a direct link to downtown Montreal. So basically the Rem de l'Est project is better in every aspect, but for half the cost, which makes it even more infuriating that this project was cancelled in the first place. Recently there has been doubts about the project. We're not even sure if they're gonna end up building the tramway. Building rapid bus lines has been suggested, which would be very bad news. BRTs are good if you want something better than regular buses, but don't have the money or don't want to risk too much money to have something more efficient and permanent, such as a tramway or a metro. But the eastern part of Montreal doesn't have much rapid transit, and it's a pretty populous area. So these people deserve to have more rapid transit with rails. At least in the article I found, there's definitely opposition to this BRT idea, so that's good. A tramway would be better than the BRT, but it's not the ideal solution. And as we saw, it's very expensive. So it's actually good that the government is currently having some doubts about this project. Well, actually it sucks for the people living there that are waiting for something to happen to get built. But since they're doubting about the tramway, I think it would be the perfect time to reconsider and bring back the Rem de l'Est project. They had the best idea from the start, but they abandoned it, and years later they proposed worse ideas. Enough time has been lost since 2020 when the Rem de l'Est was proposed. Sadly, if it was not cancelled, it would currently be under construction. But it's still not too late to come back to this project and finally get it started. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. Let me know what you think about all of these projects, and I'll see you on the next one.